Welcome to Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of faith and pop culture and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined today with Dr. Mike Strauss. Thank you so much for joining us. You are a professor of physics at the University of Oklahoma. Can you tell us about your research?
Yeah, I do research in what's called experimental particle physics. We study the smallest structure of the universe and the particles that make up the universe. And I currently do research at a laboratory called CERN in Geneva, Switzerland.
So that is the laboratory that was involved in that big discovery quite a few years ago, right?
Yeah, in 2012, a particle, sometimes colloquially called the God particle, or what we call the Higgs boson, was discovered. I was part of that discovery.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
And, we're going to talk about a topic, you're a scientist and I am not. And we're going to talk about kind of where we can find some common ground. So when I first became a Christian, I didn't have science at all, as an awareness or a motivation to come to faith. But it is actually, I've come to discover, very relevant in holding on to our faith. So can you explain how those who are dispassionate about science or maybe not interested in pursuing it, how that can actually be comforting and helping us in our faith?
Yeah, we live in a scientifically relevant world, from the cell phone you use to whether or not you eat genetically modified food. Science is all around us. And, science, therefore, does affect us. So the other thing that's about a Christian is science can be a great ally to our faith. So even if science isn't necessarily something that interests you or that you think will necessarily help or benefit your faith, you probably know someone who it will. A friend or a relative or a coworker who, if they understood how science points to God, it might really benefit them. So I think it's worthwhile for all of us to learn a little bit about the intersection of science and faith and how they encourage each other.
Right. That's such a good point. I know when I first became a Christian, that was the first thing that someone asked me, oddly enough. It didn't have to do with natural evil or suffering in the world. It was dinosaurs. And I had no clue how to answer. It was just, God did it and we're here, yay. And I didn't know how to respond. So would that be something then that people can use?
There's a person that I know that homeschools their kid, and their kid asked about dinosaurs, and she didn't know how dinosaurs fit into the Bible. So for her, it wasn't a big deal, but here she's trying to raise a child who understands how the biblical record is consistent with the scientific record, and she didn't know what to do with it. So that's a great example of a place in culture where it may not interest you, but just having some good answers can really help somebody else.
Right, and that's such a great point too, is that we might not find interest or value in science yet. Hopefully we get to that point where we do, but it will really help us to reach others, our children, our friends, other Christians, maybe who are suffering and their faith is struggling.
Right, and that's the other thing, you've discovered for yourself that actually that understanding of science can help your faith. Right. Sometimes it's easy to walk in my faith with Christ, but at other times it's really hard. And I'm looking, subjectively, I may not feel like God is close or doing what I want. And then I need some objective evidence to kind of fall back on and say, yes, what I believe is true. God is real. And sometimes that objective evidence that comes from science helps me in those times when the subjective relationship with God doesn't seem to be working.
Right, and that's good to remember because you're right, those facts matter when sometimes we're struggling emotionally, spiritually. If we can also rely on what we know of the truth of Scripture and the truth of the record of nature that God has provided for us, that can help kind of bring us back to a stronger faith.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then what about non-believers? There are some people who aren't yet Christians and they don't want to even entertain Christianity because, let's face it, the common misconception is that it's anti-science, anti-intellectual. So how would we step into those conversations?
Yeah, and this is another reason why even if, the relationship between science and faith might not be interesting to you, you should know something about it because it's a great way to bring those who don't know Christ at least into a place where they are willing to investigate it. It's amazing that people understand that the universe had a beginning in the Big Bang, but they don't understand the theological implications of that. So with my friends who are interested in science and don't believe in God, it's an easy conversation starter to say, not only that the Bible doesn't disagree with science, but they actually support each other. And that the story of creation in Genesis is not some myth or fairy tale, but it aligns well with the scientific content, what we know through science. And some of my best feedback comes when I talk about how Genesis fits into science, because people go, no, that can't be true. And so it's a great way to engage people who think that there's this conflict, to show them that not only there's no conflict, but they actually support each other. Right.
Good stuff. Thank you so much. So then how can people find out more from you? Just read your content and check out what you're doing.
Yeah, I write a blog, michaelgstrauss.com. And I'm coming out with a book that's probably out. It's coming out soon, called The Creator Revealed, and information about that will be on my blog.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. If you'd like to hear more from Michael Strauss, visit michaelgstrauss.com.